When I retired from the Navy after over 2 decades of service, all I wanted was peace. I had spent my life on roaring seas, intense situations, under relentless orders. So, when I settled into a quiet, picturesque lakeside community governed by an HOA, I thought I had finally found my sanctuary. The water reminded me of home, but now the waves were gentle, the sunsets calming, and the world finally felt still. I bought a small fixer-upper by the shore, and docked beside it was my pride and joy. A decommissioned Navy patrol boat I had spent years restoring. It wasn't just a boat, it was a memory, a tribute, a piece of history I refused to let die. At first, the neighbors seemed welcoming enough, polite smiles, half-hearted waves, and the occasional nod across the fence. But it didn't take long before the whispers began. One woman, in particular, made it her personal mission to disrupt the tranquility I'd earned. She introduced herself with a sharp tone and an overconfident smile as the HOA president, but everyone just called her Karen. She had a clipboard for every occasion, a complaint for every neighbor, and a superiority complex larger than the lake itself. To her, my patrol boat was an eyesore, a safety hazard, and a violation of neighborhood aesthetics. I tried to reason with her, calmly explained that the boat was legally docked, fully permitted, and meticulously maintained. But reason doesn't work on people like her. The moment she saw that boat, I became her mission. What started as passive-aggressive letters and smug comments soon spiraled into something far more disturbing. I didn't know it then, but Karen was about to take things to a level I never imagined, one that would test everything I thought I'd left behind in the service. The patrol boat wasn't just a vessel, it was a piece of me. I first stepped aboard one just like it when I was 19, green and wide-eyed, with orders in one hand and fear in the other. Over the years, through operations and storms, that type of boat became my second skin. Its metal deck knew my boots better than most homes knew their owners. So when I had the opportunity to buy a decommissioned Mark II patrol boat at a government auction, I didn't hesitate. She was battered, rusted in places, her paint faded and peeling. But I saw more than that. I saw her potential, her soul. I saw memories of friends lost and moments survived. It became my personal mission to bring her back to life. I named her Liberty Echo. Every bolt I tightened, every section I restored, wasn't just maintenance. It was a ritual of remembrance. I cleaned her hull with reverence, polished the brass to a mirror shine, and replaced her old radio system with a modern touch. She would never sail into battle again, but she would stand proud, a silent sentinel of history and honor docked quietly at the edge of my property. I'd even started giving short tours to local veterans and teens curious about the past, hoping they'd understand the sacrifices etched into every panel. But not everyone appreciated her presence. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, saw something entirely different. To her, Liberty Echo was an eyesore, a rusty monstrosity that disrupted the neighborhood's curb appeal. It didn't matter that she was docked legally in the waterway adjacent to my land, within every guideline outlined by county law and even the HOA's own bylaws. Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. The complaints started subtle. First, a friendly warning note on my door suggesting I reconsider the boat's long-term placement. Then came the official letters from the HOA, each one more forceful than the last, citing vague clauses about neighborhood harmony and visual consistency. I responded every time with copies of permits, legal citations, and documentation proving compliance. But it only fueled her campaign further. She began showing up during my work on the boat, arms crossed, mouth pursed, making snide comments about how it looked like something from a scrapyard. I kept my cool. Years in the military had taught me to choose my battles carefully. But with Karen, there was no such thing as de-escalation. Behind the scenes, she was stirring the pot, rallying other board members with exaggerated tales about property values and safety concerns. One neighbor even mentioned hearing her say I was stockpiling dangerous military equipment, as if Liberty Echo was armed and ready to wage war in suburbia. It became clear that this wasn't just a neighborly dispute, it was personal for her. She didn't just want the boat gone. She wanted me gone. The first formal letter arrived on a Tuesday, slid into my mailbox with the crisp, sterile tone only an HOA could perfect. "Dear Mr. Callahan," it began, "it has come to the attention of the board that a large watercraft has been stationed adjacent to your property, as if it were some foreign invader, not a boat moored legally in a designated slip. It went on to claim that my vessel might be in violation of unspecified community aesthetic standards and requested its immediate removal." I read it twice, then chuckled and filed it away. But by Friday, there was another. This one came certified, as if I were a criminal. Karen's name was now stamped on the letterhead, along with a list of citations drawn from the HOA handbook, some real, others clearly twisted to suit her purpose. Things like exterior appearances that detract from uniformity and equipment inconsistent with residential use. I wrote a response, citing county marina laws and the HOA's own dock usage clause, all of which I complied with. I copied in the full board and dropped the envelope in the outgoing mail. That weekend, she was waiting. I was sanding down a section of the deck when she strutted over in her pressed khakis and oversized sunglasses. Her arms were folded, lips tight, and the way she looked at the boat made my skin crawl. "Still here?" she said sharply, voice dripping with condescension. "Yep, still legal," I replied, not even looking up. "I'll have you know several board members agree this is a violation, and I'm not the only one who thinks so." "Well," I said calmly, "then they can read the bylaws, like I did." That didn't sit well with her. She stormed off, muttering something about property values and how she wouldn't let this stand. That week, the letters doubled. I received one every few days, each more aggressive than the last. She began including printed photos of my boat taken from different angles, as if she were building a legal case, or worse, some personal crusade. The language grew hostile. Phrases like intentional disregard, fines may be imposed, and forced removal under section compliance appeared repeatedly, though none were actually enforceable without board consensus or a legal proceeding. I started documenting everything. I saved every letter, every photo, and began installing motion-sensitive cameras around my property, one trained directly on the dock. I wasn't going to be intimidated, but I wasn't going to be caught unprepared either. Neighbors began to distance themselves. Some avoided eye contact. Others quietly voiced support, but feared retaliation. I understood. Karen had been ruling this HOA like a petty tyrant for years, and no one wanted to be her next target. But I was different. I'd dealt with pirates, insurgents, and corrupt officers. I'd navigated high seas and bureaucratic minefields alike. One HOA president wasn't going to shake me, not without a fight. The first real sign that things were turning dark came one morning in early spring. I walked down to the dock, coffee in hand, ready for a quiet hour working on Liberty Echo. But as I stepped onto the planks, I noticed something off. Eggs, smashed, stinking, had been hurled against the side of the hull. Yellow goo dripped down the weathered paint like a sick joke, pooling on the dock and reeking in the morning sun. Someone had crept down in the night and thrown them with a decent amount of force. I knew exactly who it was, even before I checked the footage. I rewound the camera feed and watched grainy black and white footage of Karen, hair in rollers, robe flapping like a cape, tiptoeing toward the boat at 3:12 a.m. She clutched a carton in one hand, hurling the eggs with theatrical flair before retreating with a satisfied smirk. She didn't even bother to cover her face, It wasn't some neighborhood kid pulling a prank. It was personal and stupid. I made a copy of the footage, time-stamped and labeled it, and stored it with the growing collection of evidence. Still, I didn't contact the authorities yet. I wanted to give her a chance to dig her own grave. Over the next few weeks, the petty assaults grew bolder. Garbage bags filled with yard waste began showing up beside the boat. One morning, I found a dead fish laid carefully on the deck hatch, its eyes staring blankly at the sky like a message from some suburban mafia. The patrol boat itself had taken minor scratches along the hull, nothing irreparable, but it was the intent that rattled me. This wasn't just about the boat. Karen was trying to push me out, harass me into submission or departure. I could see it in the smug look she wore every time we crossed paths. She thought she was winning. I kept my distance, said nothing. I watched from my front porch as she strutted around the neighborhood, gathering small clusters of residents for her impromptu complaints committee meetings. She'd talk in low tones, gesture dramatically toward my dock, and every so often glance toward my house to see if I was watching. I never gave her the satisfaction. Instead, I doubled down. I brought in a local veteran-owned restoration company to help with the next stage of repairs. Together, we buffed out the scratches, reinforced the deck, and even repainted some sections. The boat looked better than ever. It gleamed in the sun like it belonged to the Navy once again. That pushed her over the edge. One night, I came home late from visiting an old shipmate. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights swept over the dock and caught something. Movement. A figure darted out of sight, disappearing behind the neighbor's shed. I sprinted down to the boat, adrenaline pulsing, and there it was again. Fresh scratches along the paint, a shattered outdoor light fixture, and a trail of shoe prints in the mud. My camera had caught it all. Karen once again, dressed in black this time, crouching behind my dock with a can of spray paint and what looked like a screwdriver. I stared at the footage in disbelief, rage simmering just beneath my skin. This wasn't a territorial spat anymore. This was criminal. And I knew then that she had no intention of stopping. It was only a matter of time before she did something she couldn't explain away, something even her little band of followers couldn't ignore. I just had to wait and watch. It was a Sunday morning when I finally hit my limit. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft gold over the lake, and everything was quiet, too quiet. I walked out with my usual mug of black coffee, expecting to breathe in peace, to hear the birdsong over the gentle slap of water against the dock. But as soon as I saw the boat, the cup dropped from my hand and shattered on the deck. Liberty Echo was ruined. The entire starboard side was drenched in garish red spray paint. The words screamed out in uneven block letters, "Remove this junk, or else." The paint dripped down the hull like blood, thick and angry, soaking into every inch of metal I had spent months sanding and sealing. It covered the nameplate. It obscured the seal I'd engraved. On the upper deck, the solar panels I'd just installed were shattered. Someone had taken a crowbar to the railing, bent steel and broken brackets left behind like battlefield debris. The hatch was partially pried open, leaving splinters and bent hinges behind. Whoever had done this had taken their time. They didn't just want to send a message. They wanted to destroy something sacred. I stood there for a long while, unable to move, fists clenched at my sides. I felt rage like I hadn't felt since my active duty days. Deep, guttural, and cold. This wasn't property damage. This wasn't a neighborly dispute gone too far. This was an assault. An attack on something that held more meaning than that woman could ever comprehend. It was personal, and it was cruel. I didn't need to check the footage to know who it was, but I did anyway for the record. The camera had caught everything in high resolution. Karen, dressed in a black hoodie, gloves on, carrying a can of spray paint and a crowbar. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. She had crept down, crouched beside the dock like a thief, and gone to work with the dedication of someone who truly believed she was above consequence. She spray-painted with sweeping motions, then spent several minutes beating on the boat's exterior, pausing only to check her surroundings. There was no fear in her face, just the same smug disdain I'd seen 100 times. I called the police. I gave them everything: the footage, the screenshots, the previous letters, even the recordings of her threats at HOA meetings. They took it seriously this time. The damages weren't cosmetic anymore. It was felony-level vandalism, and the dollar amount was climbing fast. The officers who came out to take my statement shook their heads when they saw the boat. One of them, a former Marine, even muttered under his breath, "People like this have no damn respect." Karen was arrested 3 days later. When they came to her door with a warrant, I watched from my window as she stood there, still in denial, still believing she was untouchable. Her voice carried across the street, high-pitched, frantic, full of indignation. She kept shouting about how the boat was an illegal monstrosity, that she was cleaning up the neighborhood, that I had provoked her. But the officers didn't care. They cuffed her gently and walked her to the cruiser, while the neighbors watched from behind curtains and porches. No one came to her defense, not this time. I didn't feel triumph. I felt vindication. Quiet, heavy vindication, and the beginning of an end she'd written for herself. After the police took Karen away, the neighborhood buzzed with a kind of quiet disbelief. The same woman who once marched around with her clipboard like a queen enforcing petty laws was now facing real ones. But for me, that was only the beginning. Justice wasn't a few minutes in handcuffs. Justice meant making sure the damage she caused, both to my property and to my peace, was accounted for. I called my attorney the next morning. We didn't waste time. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense veteran herself, reviewed everything. The video footage alone was damning. Add in the mountain of HOA letters, the photographs of the damages, the repair quotes that totaled well over 6 figures, and the obvious pattern of harassment. It was a clear case of targeted vandalism and malicious intent. I filed a civil lawsuit within the week. The charges included destruction of private property, trespassing, harassment, and emotional distress. Karen had crossed so many lines that the paperwork practically wrote itself. The HOA board tried to distance themselves fast. They called an emergency meeting, this time without Karen at the helm, and issued a generic statement about individual actions not reflective of the association. I didn't buy it. Most of them had enabled her for years, turning a blind eye while she harassed homeowners under the guise of community standards. Still, I wasn't after them, yet. My focus was squarely on the person who thought she could destroy a piece of history and get away with it. When the lawsuit became public record, the local news caught wind of it. A reporter called me, asking for a statement, and soon enough, a short story aired on the evening news. Veterans historic patrol boat vandalized, neighbor arrested in HOA feud. It wasn't flashy, but it struck a nerve. Strangers began reaching out, veterans I didn't even know, offering support and even donations to help with repairs. I declined the money, but welcomed their words. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone in the fight. Karen, meanwhile, lawyered up. She went from defiant to desperate almost overnight. Through her attorney, she tried to offer a settlement, something quiet, something that wouldn't leave a record. I refused. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about accountability. When we stepped into the courtroom, her confidence had evaporated. She avoided my eyes, sat stiffly beside her lawyer, and looked like a completely different person. The footage played on the courtroom screen in silence, minute after minute of her creeping along the dock, defacing my boat with bold, angry strokes. The judge didn't even need a recess. He ruled in my favor on every count and awarded $500,000 in damages, enough to cover the repairs, legal fees, and then some. The fine wasn't just a number, it was a message. That no one, not even self-proclaimed HOA royalty, is above the law. When the gavel fell, I finally exhaled. Not with revenge, but with relief. I'd fought the battle the right way, and I'd won. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in mood. It was sterile and quiet, every sound echoing with consequence. I sat at the plaintiff's table, calm but alert, dressed in my old service blazer. Across from me sat Karen, no longer the towering HOA tyrant with her crisp khakis and smug smirk. She looked small now, swallowed up by a navy blue blazer 2 sizes too big, her posture rigid, her eyes darting anywhere but toward mine. The judge was a sharp, no-nonsense man with years behind the bench and a reputation for being fair but firm. From the moment the case was called, it was clear he'd done his homework. My lawyer began with a precise, emotionless presentation of the timeline, each incident documented, every letter catalogued, and finally, the security footage. When the video of Karen appeared on the monitor, there was a strange hush in the courtroom. The sound was muted, but the images were enough. There she was, under the glow of moonlight, spray paint in hand, defacing the boat like it was her sworn enemy. Then, the crowbar, raised and slammed into the railing. The judge watched it all, stone-faced. Karen's attorney tried to spin it, claiming emotional distress, claiming the boat had triggered memories of something unspecified. They argued she had acted irrationally under pressure, that she'd been trying to beautify the neighborhood. But the judge cut through it like a scalpel. He asked one question. Had she received the HOA's own guidelines confirming the legality of the docked vessel? She had. Had she been warned to stop? Repeatedly. Had she trespassed on private property to carry out her acts? Unquestionably. Her excuses fell apart under the weight of undeniable proof. When the judge delivered the verdict, he didn't mince words. He called her actions malicious, disrespectful, and egregious. He ordered Karen to pay $500,000 in damages and court costs, and issued a formal warning that any further retaliation would result in criminal penalties. I looked over once, just before the gavel fell. Her face had crumbled. No anger, just disbelief. The look of someone who'd finally realized the rules she wielded so carelessly now applied to her, too. For the first time since this all began, I felt seen. And more importantly, I felt heard. In the days following the verdict, the neighborhood changed. The silence that once felt like tension now carried something closer to peace. Karen's fall from her self-appointed throne was swift. The HOA board removed her from her position unanimously, citing gross misconduct and community endangerment. Her house went up for sale just a few weeks later, the lawn suddenly bare of the perfectly trimmed hedges she used to obsess over. People no longer avoided me. They waved. Some even stopped by to say they were sorry, for staying quiet, for not stepping in sooner, for letting it get so far. I didn't hold it against them. Fear does strange things to people. One evening, a group of neighbors gathered near my dock, offering to help repaint the boat. We spent hours sanding away the remnants of her wrath, the red paint slowly giving way to the clean steel beneath. Someone brought burgers, someone else brought beers. The boat wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a symbol of standing tall in the face of harassment. Before we called it a night, I installed a small bronze plaque near the helm that read, "She tried to sink it and ended up sinking herself." Everyone clapped. I just smiled. I didn't move to that lakeside community looking for a fight. I came searching for peace, for quiet days and memories on the water. But sometimes, Standing your ground becomes the only option. Karen thought she could bully, threaten, and destroy without consequence. What she didn't expect was a quiet sailor who knew how to weather storms and who fought with patience, proof, and principle. Liberty Echo still stands at my dock, gleaming in the sun, a testament to resilience. In the end, justice wasn't loud, it was steady. And in that calm after the chaos, I finally found the peace I'd earned.